It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha! Jazz hands. Okay, been a while since I did a Feedback Friday before, it's been a while since I did a Feedback Friday. Period. Better sentence. Okay. And there are some new viewers to the channel. I noticed the last time I did a Feedback Friday, some people seem to not quite understand how it works. They thought that this is something where I'm going to respond to specific comments. That's not how we do it here. For one, I don't want to put anybody on the spot. A big thing about me and my stuff and what I decide to do. Oh, I'm wearing a Punisher shirt. Exciting, huh? Yeah, I like the Punisher. And now you can wear Punisher stuff without people who knowing what it is thinking you're a psycho, because of the Netflix show, which is awesome. Highly recommend the Punisher Netflix show. But the way Feedback Friday works is I kind of look at overall trends in the comments. The last Lady Bits video already, it's only been out for, as I'm recording this, 2 days, less than 2 days, and it's got over 150 comments. There's no way I'm going to be able to get through all of those. So what I do is I try to look at the most common trends in comments and discuss them more generally. Because the other thing is I don't want to put anybody on the spot. I very rarely call out specific users because one of the things that's super important to me is that people feel like they can speak freely without getting harassed. And I don't think anybody can say they support that and then use a bully pulpit like YouTube, and you know, call individuals out. It's not a balanced format. And I'm very aware of that. So for people who don't know what a bully pulpit is, I shouldn't use those terms with the way bullying is. A bully pulpit means that somebody has a conspicuous position to speak out and other people don't. So you have to be aware of those power dynamics on YouTube. I don't like drama videos. I don't like call out videos. I don't like that stuff unless somebody's a public figure, like a super famous, like major celebrity, or a politician, or somebody's come at me directly, like they've made a video. I try not to call people out. I deal with topics, not people. Unfortunately, nowadays, headlines are driven by people. The who is so much more important or primary than the what, where, and why, or the how. Which makes it difficult. The lines are blurred, and it's like, but I do not like to personalize these things. Whatever that says about me, I'm an ideas person. I'm a concepts person. I'm not a personal attacks person. So that's not how I do it. If you don't like that, there are plenty of drama channels that are constantly fighting with each other on YouTube. Go watch them. You'll like it better. I'm me. I have to do what I can defend. And that means focusing on topics. Now, this was one of those ones where I thought long and hard about the inclusion of certain things. I felt like, you know, one of the cornerstones of feminist theory is the concept of patriarchy. It's little understood. I had no idea how little understood. More on that in a bit. I also knew that was going to trigger people, and I wanted to try to deal with it as gently and as diligently as I possibly could. It was one of those tricky ones where there's a lot of information on the concept of patriarchy. Unfortunately, a lot of it is think pieces and first-person essays that aren't scientific. They're not, anthropological studies. They're not actually looking at, and this is my bias in methodology. I like the anthropological approach. That's what I took in school. I didn't take sociology. I took anthropology. And so I'm kind of, how do these structures, I don't want to say benefit society, because we eventually learned that there was a short-term benefit, but long-term there were issues. But my brain got trained to think, how do these function? How do these have any sort of benefit at all? What do they do? And I knew some people were going to get upset, and I made a mistake in how I decided to go about it. I know some people who sort of self-identify as MRAs, or sort of the manosphere types, do watch this channel, and I value their viewership. I give credit to anybody who watches content, especially watches content regularly from the so-called other side. So I thought I'd give him one, right? I'd incorporate, since patriarchy is one of these things that makes MRA sensitive. I thought I'd include an MRA concept and go like, look, I don't agree with you on the origins of this, but I do agree that there is something to this observed phenomenon. Well, it kind of backfired on me. Lesson learned. I hate thinking that an idea is too toxic to explore, but it's, and I don't want to say not never, I'm never going to do that again. I've learned my lesson saying that, but things are too hot right now to kind of delve into those waters, and it sucks, because I would like to take steps towards steps towards getting some common ground with people who are concerned about men's issues, because I think there's reasons to be concerned about certain men's issues, precisely because these hangovers from old social structures do have some things that affect men. Whenever something is imbalanced, I prefer the term imbalanced in some ways than unequal, because equality is like, well, what does equal mean? Like in mathematics, we know equal sign means left side is essentially the same as right side. 2 + 2 = 4. It's the same thing, right? When you start talking about people, that's really tough. I mean, I will always remember an interview I did with the musician Chaos, and he started saying it's not about equality, it's about equivalency. It's about treating hip hop as equivalent to pop music or rock and roll. Not equal, because they're not. Hip hop and rock aren't the same thing. It is not equal, but it is equivalent. It is equivalent quality. It is balanced. We need to take a balanced approach to what music is in that context. And that stayed with me. So this idea of balance, we still have a society that is relatively unbalanced in terms of domestic sphere and professional sphere. And I think it's really important, and I did this briefly in Gamer's Guide to Feminism, the preceding series to Lady Bits, going back and actually showed how that formed. And obviously, you could write a 400-page book just on that topic. In a half-hour video, it's very hard to get it all in. And this show especially, it started off as 10,000 words, and the cuts were merciless. I'm going to work as much as I can. And I had a whole section on Aristotle that I'm going to try to find a way to put into the next show. If not the next show, then other stuff. It doesn't really work in the objectification show, but I've got to find a way to put it in, because that's important. But it had to come out because there was just too much. The thing it is unnatural to separate Aristotelian philosophy from patriarchy, because he's the guy that it really embedded through Aristotle and the thinking of Aristotle. So more on that. I don't want to get too into that with this. And it's really hard to not go into the weeds in stuff like that, right? When you get into those ancient philosophies, I mean, there's a classic example of, I love reading Aristotle. I know, big nerd right there. I love reading Plato, Socrates. And part of the reason I love it is so old, and they didn't have the benefit of the modern science that we have now in terms of, things like DNA testing and all these really rigorous, scientific method studies, all that stuff. And still they were so wise about so many things. Now, they were wrong about a lot too, but they came before us. And what's amazing to me is not that they were wrong about a lot of things. That's to be expected. It's how much they were right about. And I think a lot of, because of the way academic discourse is structured, where it's all like, rah, 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 just tear it all down. I grew up around academics, and that's one thing I despise about academics is the negative optioning that goes on in academia of, oh, it's nonsense. If I could ban one phrase from academia, it's like, that's just nonsense. I'd ban that phrase. Not because it's not true sometimes, right? Because it's used as a crutch by too many in their thinking. They just say it's nonsense. They don't attempt to explain why it's nonsense. They just dismiss it. That's the difference between a rebuttal and a dismissal. If it's nonsense, you're not engaging with it. If it's nonsense, if you are so sure that it's nonsense, you should be able to tell me why. And a lot of people are like, well, I'm not going to dignify that with a response. Maybe that's better than it's nonsense, but so many people just say it's nonsense and don't elaborate. That's not dialogue, right? And so it's tough. I want to deal with some of the feedback, because I think a lot of it was done in good faith. A lot of it, how do I put this? A lot of it, what I read from it, there are people that desperately want to talk about this, but there is so much pain connected to the modern masculine experience that understandably some people actually can't come at this intellectually. It's too personal. It's too raw. It's too fresh wound for them. And I'm struggling with how to respect that and still go super nerd as I am wont to do on these things. Because I can talk about systems of government and sort of that intersection of political science and history and all these other things till I'm blue in the face. I love this stuff. I love to see how it influenced human history. But I also want to be respectful to people's feelings, because you guys know I believe feelings matter. I'm not one of these I don't care about your feels types, but I did have to tell quite a few people in the last week, look, you're triggered, because it was just, they weren't responding to what I said. They were responding to what they thought I meant, and having been there, that's a legitimate response, even if it's not an accurate one. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, people have feelings, and those feelings are there for a reason. And part of the problem with the false masculinity of historical science is that they thought that decisions divorced from emotion created better decisions. They actually found that they don't. Don't argue me. This is science. This is what they found. This is what the big trouble with artificial intelligence and machine learning is. That you have to teach a machine essentially some simulation of compassion and a conscience and ethics before you teach it how to make decisions, like the actual process of I'm going to choose between two things. Because if you don't have that framework, machines make decisions that are cold, calculating, and by our way of thinking, barbaric. And one of the brilliant things about Aristotle, and I don't want to spoil anything, is a lot of the thinking of Aristotle came through the idea. Aristotle is where we get the idea of fundamental human rights. I know this seems strange that there was ever a time in human history that fundamental human rights didn't exist, but we did have that time. Now, the original term for it was the rights of man, and that's very important, and that's what I want to include in the next show, why it was actually called the rights of man, universal rights of man, because who was defined as a man, because not all males were considered men in Aristotle's thinking. And that has had a profound impact on a lot of the things that we're still struggling with today. But I want to save that for the show, because I'd rather be able to write it and be precise and be specific. And that's been one of those things that I have had to get used to in this process, that people do not receive a lot of what I say when I've actually written a script with the precision that I've written it. They add words, they take away words, and sometimes adding one word or changing one word can change the entire meaning of a sentence. And that's unavoidable, because a lot of people have not been trained to listen to understand, as a friend and colleague of mine likes to say. He's an expert in interviewing. And he always tells me, listen to understand, don't listen to respond. And oh man, it's a mantra. And this is something I've personally struggled with. This is, if it is a journey of my life, just not responding right away. Because growing up where I did, where everything was, biggest wolf on the block kind of thing. It comes with poverty, because poverty comes with, lack of safety and all that stuff. So having to train out of that is a real underpinning of a class-based struggle. And I see that a lot in arguments surrounding gaming. You've got a person who, in my opinion, is overeducated. They've got 3 degrees. They're not really using any of them. Because they're all in some sort of liberal arts or something like that. That's hard to get a job specifically doing that. But they have all the good words, and they have all the heady references, and, all that stuff. And then I see just some person, some blue collar worker, could be in Kentucky, could be in Croatia, could be in Romania, Chile, and they don't have the $1 million words. They don't have that privilege of a liberal arts education, where their references are their favorite anime and their favorite video game. It's Vas from Far Cry 3 instead of Jean-Paul Sartre, in terms of philosophy and perception and that kind of stuff. And some people dismiss that as junk. I don't, because where I grew up, it was hip hop and dancehall reggae, and those were our references. And we were weird because we were the little grunge cohort. And so listening to Pearl Jam and Nine Inch Nails was weird at the time. That was, why do you listen to that? And so I take very personally when people start now going, oh, certain things are brilliant. Johnny Cash is brilliant, or certain rappers are acceptable and others aren't, and all that stuff. And that makes these discussions really complicated, because I don't want to sit here and seem like I'm lecturing people. At the same time, I do think there is a real lack of understanding of the history of some of these phenomena. And, patriarchy was one of them. The first part of the show with all the stuff about workplace conditions and cost benefit analysis of having diverse workplaces and all that stuff. That was making sure the studies were legit was the tough part. I did throw out a few, because I was like, and the reason I didn't specifically cite them is, you guys who have watched my stuff for a long time, how I work. I do points of commonality, right? Not this study says this, because way to mess yourself up finding one study that seems to say something kind of goofy and that makes it exciting. No, you don't do that. It's like, oh, okay, this study in the US and this study in the UK both found similar things. That is the beginning of something, because they were able to replicate two different population groups. So it's not something unique to America. It's not something unique to the UK. It's, you know, and I do expect that globally different sorts of findings will, because I mean, let's face it, if you go to a Japanese company and start measuring the number of white men in the workplace, it's going to be very different. It's Japanese. You'd expect the majority of people there to be Japanese. You know, the gaijin are the minority. So that's why I said, you know, why is the benchmark white men? Well, because, you know, that happens to be the dominant workplace person. And, you know, the other thing was checking to see, is gaming actually terribly unique in terms of findings? And tough to say for sure. Things are pointing to no, it is a unique workplace in the type of product it produces. So from a marketing perspective, there are certain truisms that are still true, but gamers are right that you can't just market games like you market Bleach. That's a misnomer. But when you get into, and people did take me on some on the crunch, less than the disposable mail stuff. People at least didn't call me names talking about the crunch. But the response was interesting, mixed. The rank and file employees were like, oh my God, thank you. And a lot of indie people went, oh my God, thank you. Higher level designers disagreed with me. It's for the love of it. It's this is what gaming is, all that stuff. And I thought it was interesting because one of the things I pointed out was people just see this as normal or natural in the business. And it's interesting. I don't come at it as a designer. I do design, but my predominant background is as a producer. And what producers do, or supposed to do, I say supposed to do because there were certain companies where I talked to employees there and they have producers, and that's supposed to stop precisely this from happening, but it's still going on quite badly. So there's still work to do here in game companies, but what producers are supposed to do is minimize that crunch by making sure you're hitting your milestones along the way. And I get what some higher end developers told me of. They just want to make it so good that stuff piles up. And that's great. I think that there needs to be some understanding that high-end designers, high-end developers are going to be more engaged. They are going to feel like they're getting more out of that 80-hour work week than some coding grunt who doesn't feel listened to. You know, they're not getting the same job fulfillment, you know, out of it. And those testers, those people that have to go in and fix the code, you know, the front end people, the back end people, they're the ones that are really getting burned out in crunches. And it really seems to me, as is the mandate of this program of LadyBits, that there needs to be a discussion in the industry where we get these higher end people who want to chase the muse and want to create art, and everybody wants that, right? And get in the more rank and file, the lower end employees, which, remember, again, their opinions, they don't have that bully pulpit, again, remember, and get them there and actually be able to talk on an equal footing without being afraid of getting fired. Because that I'm afraid to get fired thing, heard it over and over and over and over and over again. And that's why I decided to go anonymous on this one, because I circulated a bunch of surveys and I talked to some people, but very few people wanted to go on the record with this stuff. And I would feel awful if somebody lost their job because, you know, I know who they are, but they're going to remain nameless because I want them to be able to speak freely. Because I think what we need to get in is then some experienced producers. And it's interesting because I thought about getting into producers in gaming, and basically I'd have to start from the bottom. My experience might get me a low tier associate producer because my experience is in television, not in games. But I'm sitting here going, you don't need to kill your staff to make last minute changes. You just have to fine tune your product in a smarter way. You need to rearrange your workflow so you're discovering these things that work better sooner in the process, as opposed to at the time where you're actually making people sick. And some companies, some game companies, are more likely to push a game back than kill their employees, like make them really sick, crunching. The South Park game is one of my favorite recent examples, the Fractured But Whole, because there's actually a joke in it. It was, well, 3 months delayed is being kind. They just didn't put a release date on it until they did the first pushback. But they did push it back 3 months, and there's even a joke in the game, a guy at a bus stop saying, I feel like I've been waiting 3 months for this bus. But that's the choice you make to not burn out your staff. You have a change you want to implement, you feel like it's not quite ready, you push it back. Now, a company like Ubisoft can do that because of the way it's structured. And that's why I focused on the structures, and that's why I tied it into those patriarchal systems of inherent pecking order. The minute you're saying someone, focus camera, the minute you establish some sort of hierarchy, that affects how choices are made, right? And one commenter said, and I knew this was going to come because of the blurry lines about it, but this idea, talk about feudalism and oligarchies instead of patriarchy, except that's not the trend I'm analyzing here. I see the point, but yes, the big AAA companies do have quite a feudal structure. Mid-tier companies do function more like oligarchies. But then you get these small indie developers that still work kind of like patriarchal family units, those kind of tribal dynamics you see in smaller societies going back when it was sort of intertribal warfare. You still had that birth order issue, and you still had, it wasn't this elaborate structure, but there was still very much a pecking order. And that meant that some people got heard and other people didn't. And the issue here is that there is too much agreement in the levels at companies in gaming that are making the decisions, and they're reinforcing this idea with each other that crunches are just this natural thing. There's nothing we can do about it. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And because I'm a systems person, I just say I disagree. I had so many TV productions that said the same thing to me, and I worked at it and worked at it and worked at it, and we managed to get a little bit better each production. It is possible to, everybody understands sometimes having to work a weekend, working late, everything like that. I know plenty of people who love what they do in gaming. It's these serious health issues. And I thought I made that clear. So I was surprised that people didn't go there. But these are really, like I said, personal things. And that's why with this series, I'm not super invested in going, no, I'm right, you're wrong. I just want people to be open to new ideas and not be so quick to dismiss them. Because that was something I heard a lot from rank and file people, that they went in with this idea that was different, and their bosses said they want new ideas, they want innovation, all that stuff, and they were just shut down. That it was too disruptive to things. And I think that people in positions of power might need to stop and listen more. the problem is, even if they listened, I don't know if anybody would talk right now because everybody just seems so scared. And, you know, if I can help facilitate that dialogue, I'm happy to do that. That's part of what this program is. If any sort of managers in video games are watching, I think that hopefully will be your takeaway, that the people you're supervising are not telling you stuff that you probably should know. And they're not doing it precisely because they do love their job and they want to keep it. And that's sort of what, it's interesting. I don't want to get too into the weeds on socialization and stuff like that, but some of you may have seen the thing, Kathy Young wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal about, you know, the Me Too stuff and harassment in the workplace. And I was one of her sources, and I said, you know, it's not about HR saying our door is open. Well, nobody's going to walk through that door because people can see you going down the hall and going into HR, and then you're a snitch, right? You got to, and I learned this doing peer facilitation in my old neighborhood. You know, thank Jane and Finch for this wisdom. You can't expect people to come to you. You have to schedule time to sit down with people. And so, you know, it's a sort of thing where you could go in there and sometimes you're just talking about your favorite game. You're talking about your favorite sports ball, you know, see what I did there? Favorite superhero, whatever. Sometimes it's just talking. And then you kind of sneak in, how's it going? You know, I noticed you're a bit off the other day or something like that. And if they don't want to talk, they don't want to talk, fine. But then there's no suspicion about why they're talking to you. Especially if we want to have a more diverse community in games, you have to remember that people who are not white, people who weren't born rich, are more likely to come from these no snitching cultures. Women are more likely to not want to talk because they don't want to be a problem. Okay, they suck it up, and they shouldn't. That's part of why they get sick. People need to feel like they've been heard. And that, obviously, you know, based on what I heard, man, I heard some freaking horror stories. And I didn't want to include too many details. The Jennifer Hepler one I could use because that one was so public. Right? The Call of Duty thing was so public. We can talk about that, but I didn't want to include too many details because I was afraid that somebody would figure out who I was talking about if I did. Also, I had just had no time. The sheer, people want to talk about this industry. The amazing thing about, and guys, like, really, this is why I stick with this industry as opposed to film and TV and all that stuff. You talk to a TV person or you talk to a film person about what they do, you will get an elevator pitch of bullshit. You will get a log line. You will get the expected response. When you talk to a game developer about their work, you get insight and passion and wonder and amazement, and they care, and they will tell you exactly what happened, exactly why they made certain choices. We're not refined enough in our media churn to bullshit the way that Hollywood does. And that's what I love about this industry. There is an actual meaningful idea, a meaningful concept, exchange of ideas. That I butchered that sentence. I'm sorry. I don't know if that made any sense or not, but I'm getting excited. Also, I think when we talk about design, we're actually talking about design. We're not talking about, oh, I set up a camera and shot it this way and did that. No, you're actually having to create something that people use. But that, and I touched on it briefly with the hint, PR people, that magic, that's the gold, right? That is precisely what the PR process in gaming chokes off by this emphasis on written responses and email. And I still stand by the fact that contributed to what happened with Jennifer Hepler. There are numerous indicators in that original piece. And if you're interested, I can go through this in deeper depth. The markers of how I see that this was just written. But they're all over that interview. And so when Jennifer Hepler wrote that, I you know, I shouldn't, this is probably a terrible thing to say, but playing the games is the worst part of the business for me. If you're sitting there face to face with someone, and this is a tricky thing because people in gaming seem to have a thing about being interrupted, but sometimes an interruption is important because, you know, I'm sitting down in an interview and somebody says something like that. It's like, whoa. And this is why, you know, certain interviews of late that I am not going to name names on because it just launched 1,000 memes when people get stupid. But it is actually something you're taught as an interviewer. When someone says something that makes you go, Mer, you have to give them an opportunity through a follow-up question to clarify that. So if somebody says something, for instance, that may seem misogynist or may seem racist, you have to give them the opportunity. It is your professional obligation to give them the opportunity to clarify their statement. You know? And if anybody had done that with, for instance, James Damore, did what I did, and go, wait, what are you saying here? Are you saying that women just don't like machines? And you ask James and he goes, or no, are you saying that women aren't good with machines? He immediately says, no, absolutely not. When I confronted him with criticism of his work, he said, I absolutely agree with that. That's the job of a good reporter. That's the job of a follow-up. That is not what happens in gaming interviews because game PR companies are calibrated to minimize bad PR instead of encouraging good PR. That is the legacy media approach to marketing. That is PR 101. The issue, and I've been speaking to publicists, I spoke to a publicist I trust very much. She's on the film and TV side. But, you know, she says when somebody goes into an interview, their job is to make you love them. That is the job of a person when they go in for an interview. Be charming, be flattering, make them walk away feeling great. Now, gaming is an industry full of introverted nerds. So that's a real challenge for our personality types. You know, I was a really, really shy kid. Shy is wrong. Introverted. I was introverted and brainy and liked to do things with test tubes. I blasted a hole in the basement floor, our old townhouse, because science. You know, stuff like that. Used my sister as a science experiment more than a few times. She never lets me live it down. She apparently hates onions to this day because of that. But my mother put me in performing to try to bring me out of my shell. Well, you can't rewire an introvert, but it did teach me some things about interpersonal dynamics, and playing different characters made me go, oh, that's how it's done. Oh, okay. This is how this sort of person works and this sort of person works. You may have noticed I use that in Lady Bits. But gaming needs more of that. Gaming needs more... we need more bards. We need more people with high charisma scores. And I think that's why people tend to use musicians for, like pop musicians for E3 presentations. All of us gamers like, I don't care about Drake. But you know what? The average person cares very much about Drake or Bruno Mars or somebody like that. Aisha Tyler, somebody like that, because, oh man, 20s in charisma, right? And charisma is a subjective thing. Like, that's the other thing, that it seems like a lot of people in gaming go to pieces if somebody doesn't like them. You may notice I'm not like that. Somebody's like, you're this. It's like, that's nice. And, like, right? I'm not going to turn around and go, in my younger days, I would have been, you know, well, you're a so-and-so too. I don't do that anymore because I'm growing up, and I have learned that in gaming, choosing my words carefully, gaming is there for a lot of people in the hardest times of their lives. You don't know what the situation is with somebody you're talking to on social media. So a lot of people come at me very hard. There was an exchange just in the last little bit with someone where I had to set a boundary, and it kills me because I don't think this person is a bad person, but had to, you know, there are certain lines I just don't let people cross, because these are, you know, every person is an individual with an outline and with a personal space, both mentally and physically and emotionally. And you have to defend those borders, those boundaries, or you start feeling very exhausted and very taken advantage of, especially introverts. And so this person is still mad at me. It's been quite some time now, but I said, don't do that. They continued to do it. It's a pretty easy equation on that one, but it is interesting to me how many people don't understand that, because they have weak personal boundaries, because they either never learned them because they were neglected, because they had parents that just did not understand them, and so they didn't know how to feed their spirit. They didn't know how to nurture a nerd. Oh, what a great show that would be, Nurturing Nerds. Oh. But then there's other people who have had their boundaries actively torn down. And I think that's where a lot of the anger is coming from. They're scared. They feel unsafe. And that doesn't mean they are unsafe, but they feel unsafe, and that's valid. And it's hard to have a difficult intellectual discussion with someone in that mode. That doesn't mean they're weak. That doesn't mean they're bad. It just means it's not an appropriate conversation to have with them at that point. And too many people, because we so... how do I put this? We overvalue intelligence. We undervalue wisdom. Lots of people want to play as wizards. Very much fewer people want to play as clerics or healing class characters, because the XP isn't doled out there. Does that metaphor make sense? I hope so. But I mean, it was always a problem in World of Warcraft. I always played a healer because they needed healers, and I wasn't invested enough in having those show-off items and being like way up at the level cap. I just wanted to goof around with my friends. So, okay, I'll play a shaman. I'll be a Tauren, big honking feet, choom, 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 you know, like that. That was how I played WoW. But I was quite happy and sit back and buff. Because I played for the people I was playing with. I wasn't terribly invested in the game itself. But the thing, and this is why I love D&D, the thing about priests is you know, they're critical clerics. Their critical thing is wisdom. And wisdom's a different thing from intelligence. And we so overvalue intelligence among nerds that we miss out on wisdom. And we miss out that they're different things. And you can be super smart and not know how to apply it effectively. That is something that that is a skill you can acquire. But it's hard. It's, wisdom is accrued through getting hurt and healing, and getting hurt and healing, and getting hurt and healing, and not allowing yourself to be bitter, right? We're collectively not good at that in gaming. There's a lot of bitterness around, and I am doing what I can as one person, to try to show an alternative to that bitterness. And I mean, my alternative happens to involve cats, costumes, and cleavage. Hey, was that CCC? CCC, cats, costume, and cleavage. That's what happens to remove the bitterness from me. I mean, I admit I way overdid the boobs in this episode, but that was because I just found the material so that I figure if somebody could stare at my rack in that patriarchy part, it could actually maybe help them through it. Because yeah, ending where I begin, I completely understand the whole patriarchy thing being uncomfortable. It would have been wrong of me to not touch on it, because it is such a cornerstone of feminist thought, and yet so poorly defined. I'll probably talk about this again because I am still just kind of marveling at it. The definition where when you Google patriarchy, I shit you not, is actually wrong. Let's land on this again. Sorry this video is so long, guys. It just, I wanted to kind of be careful. But I'll pull up the Google and I'll show you the problem with talking about this. Here we are. Okay, side screen. Here we are to Google. And the first thing that comes up is the Google-approved patriarchy. Noun, a system of society or government in which the father or eldest male is head of the family and descent is traced through the male line. That is the definition of patriarchy when people look up the so-called dictionary definition of patriarchy. Here's the myriad problems with this definition, okay? A system of society or government in which the father or eldest male is head of the family. Okay, government and family, you are collapsing the domestic sphere, the private sphere, and the public sphere. First structural problem right there. The system or society of government in which the head of state is male. That is it has nothing to do with family structure in the macro. It is not a system of society or government where the father is in charge. No, that's a mistake. A family structure where the father is in charge, absolutely. An extended family and a tribal system, absolutely. But then it's usually the chief or the elder or something like that. It's just wrong. It's collapsing. And public sphere versus private sphere, when you get into second wave feminist discourse, oh my God, that's where the personal is political comes from. Okay, but we're already stumbling and we're not there yet. The second part, and descent is traced through the male line. Wrong. That's patrilineal descent. Patrilineal and patriarchal are not the same thing. They are not. And I know this because of my own damn religion. The most orthodox interpretations of Judaism are matrilineal descent, meaning descent is traced through the female line, meaning if your mother is Jewish, then you are considered Jewish. But it is patrilineal. The Orthodox still do not allow women to be rabbis. It is a patriarchy that practices matrilineal descent. So no, often, yes, descent and inheritance are patrilineal. But you can have matrilineal descent and still have a patriarchy. They're much weaker because you need female participation to an extent. But no, you can absolutely have a patriarchy with matrilineal descent. They're not the same thing. But there you go. We're stumbling not even out of the gate. I mean, if we can't define the damn term, there's no gate. This is just sloppy, 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 sloppy. You know, then you get into things where, oh, you know, we had Queen Victoria and Margaret Thatcher in England. Oh, that's a patriarchy. Well, no, it's not. Because it's not that men can't be heads of state. Women, in terms of the Queen, up until very recently when they changed with William and Kate's kids, it was the oldest male that became first in line for the throne. That's still a patriarchy. You know, just because there are a few female politicians doesn't mean it's not overwhelmingly patriarchal. It's just, you know, on the scale, it's weaker. And when we get so messed up in terms, how do we have a discussion about this? You guys know I'm big on terms. That's why I always define. And one of the things I'm very glad about in this show is that people said that's the best definition of patriarchy I've ever heard. Thank you, because it's a freaking accurate one. I mean, that's what you do in anthropology. You study family systems and governmental systems and how these things work. And I'm sitting here going, because this stuff is controlled through sociology departments, and it's not the same. The approach is very, very different. There is overlap, but you know, a better one, I didn't want, males hold primary power in patriarchies. That's probably the simplest way to do it. But yeah, you Google it, you're led astray. No wonder we're fighting about this crap all the time. So, you know, as I said, beginning of a discussion. There's so much more we can talk about on this. It's a moving target. So I appreciate the people who did engage in the discussion. I appreciate the people that shared. The playable character one that's coming up, patrons will get, again, patrons get previews of all the shows. I can't stress this enough. That one of the things, because there's no profit participation through the Patreon model, access. So please become a patron. I didn't do the, is this it? Yeah, there we are. I didn't do this video. Bad me. And half you probably haven't watching this anymore because 50 minutes in. But I'll stop there. No good out. Just have to stop because holy shit, 50 minutes. But, and I know I'll get some people go, you didn't answer any questions. Because not every difference of opinion needs to be hashed out, right? Not every single one has to be I'm right or you're right or I'm wrong or you're wrong. It's just, I appreciate where you're coming from. And that was a lot of, I'm not going to get into the responses on disposable male syndrome precisely because it's too raw. I determined that some people are in difficult situations and it's not the right time to have a real nuts and bolts discussion about some of these things. They need to put their head down and get through whatever it is they're going through. Some people that say that's fence sitting, some people say that's dodging, some people, all those bad things that are, it's not my intention at all. I want to be compassionate and I want to affirm that people I disagree with are human. And part of that is recognizing when the debate is less important than just saying to somebody, I see you and I hear you and you matter in this moment. I think sometimes just the ability to write a comment and see it appear makes somebody feel like they matter just a little bit. So that's where I'm coming from. Because I am from Momoland, where we believe in softness and hugs. Right? Okay, see you guys on Monday, where I'm going to be doing a thing for Purple Day for epilepsy by request. Thanks for watching and have a good weekend.